Welcome back, family. To everyone already subscribed to the Karma Diaries by Uncle Sammy, thank you. Your time and your comments keep this thing going. Settle in. The truth and the twist are coming. She thought laughing in his face would end the conversation. Instead, it ended the marriage. Julian Ashford stood in his own kitchen in Houston's River Oaks, holding a hotel receipt his wife never meant for him to find, and watched Simone toss her wine back like nothing in the room had changed. "I'll see whoever I want," she said, grabbing her keys off the counter. She didn't know that by the time her taillights cleared the front gate, her husband had already picked up the phone and started closing every door she thought would always be open to her. Before we go any further, this is Uncle Sammy, and this is the Karma Diaries. If you're new here, welcome. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from tonight, because I read every single one. If you've been riding with me for a while, you already know what we do. We tell the stories nobody else will tell, the ones about quiet men who get pushed too far and answer with receipts instead of rage. Hit that subscribe button, tap like, and share this with somebody who needs to hear it. Now let's get into it. Julian Ashford was 43 years old, and up until that Tuesday night, he believed he understood the woman he'd married. He'd built a $7 million estate in River Oaks from nothing. No family money, no head start, nothing but a work ethic that scared people who'd never had develop one. He'd spent 12 years building Meridian Development into one of the most respected commercial real estate firms in Texas. He never once imagined his wife of 11 years was capable of standing in their kitchen and laughing at him like he was the one who'd done something wrong. The gate at the front of the property opened with a soft mechanical hum every morning around 6, and Julian liked to walk the grounds before the sun cleared the tree line. 2 acres of manicured lawn, a stone fountain his late father would have called excessive. For bedrooms, a wine cellar Simone had insisted on. Cameras mounted discreetly at every corner of the property. It was the kind of house people slowed their cars down to look at on Inwood Drive. He'd built it, paid for it, and on quiet mornings like that one, he still couldn't quite believe it belonged to him. He hadn't always had mornings like this. Julian grew up in Houston's 3rd Ward, in a 2-bedroom rental his mother worked double shifts to keep heated. His father left when Julian was 9, and by 14, he was already helping his mother with groceries out of money he made cutting lawns. At 19, he took a job hauling drywall on a construction site for $12 an hour, watching the site managers walk around in clean boots making decisions, and something in him decided quietly that he'd be standing where they stood one day. He just didn't know yet how long the road would be. He studied every contract he was ever handed. He took night classes in real estate finance while working full days. By 27, he had his broker's license. By 32, he had his own firm, 3 employees, and a folding table for an office. Simone had been there for that folding table. She'd been a junior interior designer back then, sharp-eyed and full of opinions. And she'd walked into his first real office and told him exactly what was wrong with it. He'd laughed. He'd hired her to fix it. Somewhere in between, he'd fallen in love with her. 12 years later, that version of Simone barely existed anymore. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped taking design clients, stopped talking about projects, stopped asking him about his week. What replaced it was spending. Not reckless exactly, just constant, steady, like water working its way through stone. New handbags. Weekend trips with friends he'd never met. A decorator brought in to redo rooms she had already designed herself 2 years earlier. Julian paid the credit card statements without much comment. He told himself that was what love looked like after 12 years. He was wrong about that, though he didn't know it yet. That Tuesday started like any other. Julian kissed the side of Simone's head on his way to the coffee maker, and she tilted an inch away from him without looking up from her phone, the way she'd been doing for months without either of them naming it out loud. He didn't push. He never pushed. By lunchtime, his assistant, Renata, had walked into his office with a printed statement and a look on her face he didn't like. "There's a charge here I flagged," she said, sliding across the desk. "The Larkspur Hotel. Doesn't match anything on your calendar." The Larkspur was a boutique property downtown, nowhere near the spa and the Galleria, where Simone had told him she'd spent that same Friday afternoon with her friend Camille. Julian read the charge twice. Something in his jaw tightened just slightly, like a lock clicking into place somewhere behind his ribs. He didn't call her. He didn't text her. He folded the printout, slid it into his desk drawer, and closed it. Whatever this was, he wanted to understand the full shape of it before he said a single word out loud. That had always been his way. Measure twice, cut once. That evening, Simone was in the kitchen when he got home, a glass of red wine already poured, one earbud in, watching something on her phone propped against a fruit bowl. She looked relaxed, comfortable, like a woman with absolutely nothing weighing on her conscience. Julian set his keys down and loosened his tie. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice easy. "Renata flagged a hotel charge today. The Larkspur. Friday. You know anything about that?" He asked it the same way he'd asked about a missing charger. Light, unbothered, giving her every chance to explain it away cleanly. Simone set her wine glass down slowly, the stem clicking against a marble counter. Then she turned and looked at him, not with panic, not with guilt, but with something close to amusement. She laughed, not a nervous laugh, a full, genuine one, like he'd stumbled into the middle of a joke and delivered the punchline by accident. "Julian," she said, "the way you'd say, 'bless your heart' to a child. I was there. Yes, I was with someone." She picked the glass back up, took a slow sip, and watched him over the rim like she was waiting for him to catch up. "And before you ask," she said, setting the glass down again and rolling her shoulders back, "I'll see whoever I want." The refrigerator hummed. Something played faintly from her phone speaker. Julian didn't move. She kept going, her voice smooth now, almost bored, like she was explaining something obvious to someone slow to catch on. 11 years, Julian. You think you're going to blow all this up? This house, these cars, my name on everything. You're not that man. You've never been that man." She said it without cruelty, which somehow made it land even harder. She picked her keys up off the island, dropped the earbud back in, and glanced at her screen. "I need some air," she said. "Don't wait up." Her heels clicked across the tile. The front door opened and closed, and through the kitchen window Julian watched her headlights sweep across the front gate as she pulled out onto Inwood Drive. The gate slid open. Her car disappeared into the dark, and the gate slid shut behind her, quiet and automatic, the way it always had. He stood at the counter for a long moment, feeling something settle cold and solid in his chest. She thought she knew exactly who she'd married. That was her first mistake. Julian picked up his phone and called Foster Lane, his longtime attorney, and one of the few people he trusted with everything. Foster picked up on the second ring. "I need a locksmith and a new security company at the house tonight," Julian said, his voice flat and controlled. Every lock, every gate code, every camera, all of it was rekeyed and reset before sunrise. "Can you make that happen?" A short pause on the other end. "I'll make the calls right now," Foster said. "Give me an hour." After he hung up, Julian didn't sit down and stew. He started walking the house room by room, the way he used to walk a job site at the end of a long day, taking stock of what was there and what needed protecting before morning. He passed a cabinet where Simone kept her personal files, folders stuffed with receipts she never organized but never threw out either. He passed a family tablet charging on the bookshelf. He thought about the home office down the hall, where the property documents lived, and the safe behind the closet panel where the title to the house was kept. The security crew arrived just before midnight. 2 technicians, a plain van, and a case of equipment. They moved with the quiet efficiency of men who'd been well briefed. One went straight to the front entry. The other headed for the gate control panel, around the side. Foster had already walked them through what needed doing, so Julian didn't have to explain much of anything. While the crew worked, he and Foster sat in the study, a dark panel room with built-in shelves that had absorbed more late-night conversations over the years than either of them could count. "Title first," Julian said. Foster already had it pulled from the digital file he kept on Julian's personal documents. He slid the paper across the desk, and Julian's eyes went straight to the ownership line. Julian Ashford, just his name. No joint ownership, no second signature. He'd bought the property 3 years before the wedding and had briefly considered adding Simone's name during their 5th anniversary, back when things were still good between them. Foster had advised against it at the time. Julian had listened. Simone had simply assumed her name was on it. She'd never actually checked. "She doesn't know," Julian said. It wasn't a question. Doesn't appear to, Foster answered. From somewhere in the house came the low whir of a drill as the locksmith worked through a deadbolt. Then quiet. Then the mechanical test of the gate motor opening and closing, opening again. Julian reached for the family tablet he grabbed earlier and turned it over in his hands. He pressed the home button and tried Simone's usual passcode, her mother's birthday. It opened. The messaging app carried a red badge with dozens of unread notifications. He didn't open a single one. Not yet. He set the tablet face down beside the title. That's evidence, Foster said, glancing at it. I know. Have it documented properly before anyone reads a word of it. Foster opened a second folder. There's one more thing worth pulling tonight, he said, waiting until Julian looked up. The prenup. You had me draft an infidelity clause and an asset protection provision, remember? 9 years ago, before the Meridian expansion closed. Julian remembered. Simone had called it unnecessary at the time, a little insulting even. But she'd signed it and moved on, apparently never thinking about it again. She thinks it's just paperwork. Julian said quietly. She's wrong. Foster answered, his voice level. It's airtight. I made sure of it. By 4 a.m, every lock in the house had been changed, every gate code reset, the camera system wiped and re-registered under an account Simone had no access to. The technicians packed their equipment and drove off into the dark. Julian walked through every door himself before he finally sat down. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months. Whatever came next, he was no longer walking into it blind. Simone's black sedan pulled up to the gate just after noon the next day. Julian wasn't there to see it. He'd gone into the office that morning, dressed and steady, moving through a schedule as if the last 12 hours hadn't happened at all. Odessa Grant, the house manager, was waiting just inside the gate when Simone arrived, a single-packed overnight bag sitting beside her feet. Odessa was a small woman with close-cropped gray hair and a face that gave away nothing. Simone lowered her window, already irritated. Odessa, open the gate. Good afternoon, Mrs. Ashford, Odessa said, unmoved. Mr. Ashford asked me to bring this out to you, Odessa said, lifting the overnight bag toward the gate bars. He says when you're ready to talk, on his terms, you can reach out to his attorney, Mr. Lane. Simone stared at the bag. What is that? My things? Is this a joke? Her voice had already lost some of its certainty. Odessa said nothing, only set the bag down on the pavement, and turned to walk back toward the house without a word. Simone sat behind the wheel, both hands on it, staring at the gate she'd driven through without thinking for 11 years. For the first time, maybe the first time in a very long time, she seemed to understand that things were not exactly where she left them. Tell him to call me, she said, her voice smaller now. I'll pass that along, Odessa answered, already walking away. The gate stayed shut. The new cameras above the entrance held steady, their small lights blinking slow and even, indifferent to whatever Simone was feeling in that moment. She sat there a long while before finally backing out. The overnight bag remained on the pavement, exactly where Odessa had left it, until Simone finally got out and took it. Julian met with his older sister, Bianca, that same afternoon in a small private office he kept downtown under a holding company name, far from Meridian's main headquarters. Bianca was 6 years older, a forensic accountant who'd built her own career the same patient way Julian had built his. No shortcuts, no favors, just careful, methodical work. When Julian called that morning, she hadn't asked many questions. She'd only said, "Tell me where and when." When he walked in, she was already standing at the window with coffee in both hands. "You look like you slept 2 hours," she said. 3, maybe, he answered. He sat down across from a small conference table she'd already covered with blank forms, a legal pad, a laptop open to a blank spreadsheet. She'd come prepared before she even knew the shape of what he needed. That was Bianca. "Talk to me," she said, and he did. The hotel charge, the confrontation, Simone's exact words, the locks, the title, the tablet, the prenup. He kept his voice level the entire time. When he finished, Bianca set her pen down. "She actually said that to you? Word for word." "Word for word," Julian said. "Okay," Bianca said, folding her hands. "What do you need from me?" The money, Julian answered. Every joint account, every household card. I want to know what moved when it moved and where it landed. How far back? Start with 18 months. Go further if you find something worth chasing. She nodded and started writing. I'll need to read access to the account records. Foster's pulling everything this morning. You'll have it by noon. She studied him for a moment. The same measuring look she'd carried since they were kids. You doing all right? She asked. I'm fine, he said. She didn't push it further. That afternoon, Julian drove back to the house and sent Simone a short, controlled message through Foster's office. She could come by at 2 to collect some personal items, and Julian would be present. She arrived at 2:07 in a friend's car, since her sedan was registered in his name. She'd reapplied her composure like makeup, chin up, jaw soft, the expression she used when she wanted to be the reasonable one in the room. She moved through the house carefully, glanced at the new keypad by the door without comment, and came back downstairs 20 minutes later with a rolling suitcase. In the foyer, she stopped. Julian, she said, her voice softer now. I think we should talk. Really talk, don't you? We will, he said, through Foster, when you're ready. You're really going to make this formal? I'm going to make it organized, he answered. She studied his face, looking for a crack, a place where she could get her fingers in and pull. He gave her nothing. His expression stayed even, almost patient. The way a man looks when he already knows exactly how a conversation is going to end. Okay, she said finally. I'll be in touch. She left. Bianca called at 6:48 that evening while Julian was still in the study. I found something, she said, her voice careful and precise, the voice she used when the numbers had told her something ugly. Joint checking over the past 14 months. 41 transfers, mostly between $400 and $1,200 each, spaced irregularly, never the same amount twice. Structured to stay under the automatic flag threshold, Julian said. Exactly. Added up, it comes to just over $58,000. Gone. The room went quiet except for the low hum of the air system. Where did it go? Julian asked. That's what I'm still working on, Bianca said. The transfers land in an account I don't have full visibility into yet. A personal account, not connected to anything under your name. She paused. I should have a clearer picture by tomorrow. Get it, Julian said. I need to know exactly where that money's been going. 2 days later, Bianca walked into the office with a thick folder and set it on the table without a good morning. She unclipped the elastic and spread the contents in a flat, organized row. Bank statements, a hand-drawn timeline, 2 sets of contract bid records. The $58,000 didn't go to a shopping account, Bianca said, sliding a single page toward him. At the top, highlighted in yellow, was a business account name, Colton Reyes, Vantage Capital Partners. 41 transfers over 14 months, she said, all landing in a business operating account tied to his development company. She dug into his public finances. He's been in trouble for a while, at least 2 years. 2 over-leveraged projects, a construction loan quietly in default since last spring, a line of credit maxed out before that. She was keeping him liquid. Julian said, partially, Bianca answered. That alone doesn't fix a man with his level of debt, Bianca continued, but it kept him operating long enough to keep appearances up. She hesitated, then pulled the bid records forward. And here's where it gets worse. She laid 2 public filings side by side, Julian's original bid submissions beside them, obtained through Foster. 16 months ago, you bid on the Alden Square mixed-use project. Colton's firm underbid you by just enough to win. 7 months ago, the Westheimer retail contract. Same thing. She tapped the numbers. Both times precise, not dramatic. Just precise enough to win, without raising questions. Julian went still. Colton's winning number on Alden Square was within $40,000 of my internal cost projection, Bianca said quietly. The one that only existed in your private deal file. The one you kept on the home server. Julian's voice was flat. She had the login. Bianca slid the hand-drawn timeline toward him. Every time you locked in your private numbers, a transfer to Colton followed within 3 to 6 weeks. Then he'd submit a bid that beat yours by just enough. Julian looked at the timeline for a long time without saying anything at all. He thought about the 4 months he'd spent on Alden Square, land acquisition, design consultations, contract and negotiations, and the morning Foster had called to say they'd lost it. He'd told himself it was just aggressive competition. He hadn't been wrong about Colton being aggressive. He'd only been wrong about where that aggression had actually come from. She was in this before the affair went physical. Julian said slowly, the first transfer was 14 months back. Alden Square was 16 months back. He looked up. She was feeding him my numbers before any of this ever became about a hotel. Bianca held his gaze without softening it. That's what the timeline shows, she said quietly. Julian leaned back in his chair, the full weight of it settling onto his chest. This wasn't a marriage that had simply broken down. It wasn't even just an affair. It was something coordinated. Simone had opened a door at his own house and handed Colton Reyes a map, straight, to the most valuable thing Julian had ever built with his own 2 hands. Keep digging, he said finally. Every transfer, every bid, every connection between them. I want the full picture before I decide what to do with any of it. That evening, standing at the study window watching the pool lights turn the back lawn blue and white, Julian called Simone. His voice was soft, tired-sounding, the voice of a man humbled by something hard. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said. I don't want to keep going back and forth. I think we should really talk. A pause. I'm listening, she said, careful, watching. Come back to the house, he said. We can sit down, figure out where we go from here. I'm not saying everything's fine. I'm saying I'm willing to try. Another pause, longer this time. What changed? She asked. I just think we're both adults, Julian said. This is our life. Our home. He let the word sit there, our, knowing exactly how she'd hear it. She came back the next afternoon, walking to the front door like a woman who'd already decided she'd won. Shoulders back, chin level. 2 bags with her even though he'd only invited her for dinner. She looked around the foyer at the staircase, the art, the floors, the way someone checks that something they own is still theirs. It's good to be home, she said. Julian smiled at her, an easy, practiced smile. The days that followed had a surface-level calm to them. They ate dinner at the same table, though not the same room at night. Simone had taken over the guest suite without discussion, and Julian said nothing about it. He let her settle. He made coffee in the mornings, asked how she'd slept, kept his voice easy and his face open. Meanwhile, Foster was working. The prenup is clean, he told Julian on one call. The infidelity clause is explicit. Documented ongoing infidelity triggers the asset protection provision automatically. She forfeits her claim to joint accounts, investment properties, and any equity argument. How clean is the language? Julian asked. Clean enough that her best attorney reads it for 20 minutes and tells her to settle. Foster said, keep her comfortable. Keep her talking. Let Bianca finish the trail. Simone got careless faster than Julian expected. By the 4th day, she'd stopped angling her phone away from him at the table. She stopped leaving the room to make calls. She'd drift toward the sitting room window, half turned away, her voice dropping just low enough that she thought he couldn't hear. He heard everything. He kept a small notebook in his desk drawer and wrote it all down each night. He caught fragments in the hallway. Just be patient. It's almost done. Dinner Thursday, the place on Westheimer. He walked past without slowing his stride, letting her believe she was still invisible. Every evening he added what he'd heard to the notebook. Nothing digital. Nothing that could sink anywhere she might stumble across it. The pages filled steadily. Simone believed the storm had passed. She believed she was standing on solid ground again. She had no idea that every quiet evening she thought she was winning back was another page in a file that would eventually be laid out flat in front of her. Let me pause the story right here for a second, because I know some of you are already in the comments typing, he's playing chess while she's playing checkers. And you're not wrong. I built this channel on stories exactly like this one. Quiet, patient people who don't scream. They just document. If that's the kind of storytelling you come here for, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the next one. Because we post new stories regularly, and I promise you the payoff is always worth the wait. All right. Back to Julian, because it's about to get a whole lot worse for Simone. It was late on a Thursday when the knock came. Two soft raps against the open study door. Julian looked up from his desk. Odessa stood in the doorway, hands folded in front of her, and something in her eyes was different that night, more focused than usual. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you this late, but there's something I overheard that I think you need to know." Julian closed a notebook and set his pen down. "Come in, Odessa. Sit down." She sat, which she rarely did unless asked, and folded her hands in her lap. "When did you hear it?" Julian asked. "Tuesday afternoon." Odessa said, "You were at your office. Mrs. Ashford had a guest over. I was in the utility room off the hallway. The door was open. They were in the sitting room. They weren't quiet about it." Julian nodded once. "Tell me?" Odessa drew a short breath, not from nerves but from the weight of it. The man she was with, I recognized his voice from prior visits. Colton Reyes. He was frustrated about something running behind schedule, and Mrs. Ashford told him to be patient. That Terrence was almost ready. Julian's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went still. "Terrence Boyd," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." She said his name. Said she'd been working on him for over a year, that he trusted her, that he'd been listening. Odessa paused. Mr. Reyes asked what would take to get him to pull the trigger. She said Terrence just needed to believe you'd lost your edge, that the company would be better off with a new direction, that Mr. Reyes could provide stability. The room went quiet. Outside, the pool light rippled blue and white against the study window. Julian sat with that for a moment. Terrence Boyd had held a minority stake in Meridian Development for 6 years. Julian had brought him in personally, trusted him at the table, given him his stake in good faith. The thought of Simone spending a year turning that relationship into a weapon landed somewhere low and cold in his chest. This was never just about a marriage. It was never even just about money. She had been coming for everything he'd ever built. "You're sure about what you heard?" he asked. "I'm sure." Odessa said, no hesitation, no wavering in her voice at all. "Thank you, Odessa," Julian said. "I mean that." She stood, smoothed her uniform out of habit, and walked toward the door. Then she stopped without turning around. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "I've worked for a lot of people over the years. You deserve better than this." She left before he could answer. Julian sat alone in the study a long while after that, letting everything settle into the right shape in his mind. The affair, the money, the contract she'd helped Colton steal, and now this, a slow, patient play for his company built with people he'd trusted for years. He called Foster first. "It's worse than we thought," he said. She was going after the company through Terrence Boyd. His voice stayed level. "I need you at the house before the end of the week. Bring everything." He could hear Foster's chair shift on the other end. "I'll be there," Foster said. Julian ended the call and dialed Bianca. "I need you here, too," he said. "All of it. The full financial trail. Everything you've built." "When?" she asked. "This week," Julian said. "It's time to move." Simone dressed the next morning like it was the first day of something new. She pulled up to the gate in a cream silk blouse and tailored ivory slacks. Hair done, jewelry minimal but chosen with care, the outfit of a woman signaling a fresh start without looking like she was trying too hard. She decided overnight that the smart move was to let Julian feel like he had the upper hand. Give him the reconciliation conversation he seemed to want, let him settle, let things return to normal. She knew how to manage him. She always had. The gate code still worked. Julian had confirmed it with her the night before, on purpose. Odessa opened the front door before Simone could even knock, and didn't smile. She simply stepped aside and walked down the hallway, without a word. Simone didn't think much of it. She heard voices from the living room and turned the corner, expecting Julian alone. Maybe flowers on the table, maybe the soft jazz he used to play when he wanted to set a certain mood. What she found instead stopped her in the doorway. Julian sat in the high-backed chair at the head of the room. Foster sat to his left with a leather portfolio open. Bianca sat to his right, laptop open on the table. The entire surface of the coffee table was covered in paperwork. Not flowers, documents. Julian looked up at her, his face completely calm. "Simone," he said, "come sit down." She didn't move for a moment. Something cold slipped through the warmth she'd walked in with, but she recovered fast. She crossed the room, sat down across from the three of them, and folded her hands in her lap. "I didn't know this was going to be," she started. "I know you didn't," Julian said. Foster opened his portfolio and said nothing. Bianca turned her laptop screen outward, toward Simone. Julian started from the beginning, and he didn't raise his voice once. He spoke the way he ran meetings at Meridian, methodically, in order, without a single wasted word. He started with the joint account, the transfers, 14 months of incremental withdrawals, each one small enough to avoid detection. He told her the total. She blinked. Then he told her exactly where the money had gone. "Colton raised his company," he said. "Through 3 separate pass-through transactions Bianca traced back in 9 days. Simone's mouth opened slightly, then closed again, nothing coming out. Foster placed a summary sheet on the table. He slid it toward her. Dates down the left column. Dollar amounts on the right. The total circled in red at the bottom. "That's my family's money," Julian said. "Going into the business account of a man you've been sleeping with." "Julian, I'm not finished explaining." He moved to the contracts before she could get another word out. He laid both bid deals side by side. The timeline, Colton's numbers, the margin precision too exact to be coincidence. He explained what the stolen information had cost his company. The figure was in the millions. Simone sat very still, her practiced softness holding but tight around the edges now. Then Julian set a bound document in front of her, about a dozen pages stapled beneath a law firm header. She recognized it instantly, and her jaw shifted. "You remember the prenuptial agreement?" Julian asked. She shook her head, exhaled sharply. "That thing wouldn't hold up. It's years old. You know it's not fully valid." "Signed, notarized, witness filed." Foster said, cutting through her sentence without apology. "The infidelity clause is explicit, and the asset protection provision has been triggered by documented misconduct. I have 34 pages of supporting documentation ready for the court. It was filed this morning." The color drained slowly from Simone's face. "I signed that years ago," she said. "I didn't even... You made me think it was just a formality. You were an adult signing a legal document," Julian said, nothing in his tone but fact. She switched directions, her voice dropping to something softer, careful. "Julian, look, I know I hurt you. I know I did. But I felt alone in this marriage for years. I felt invisible. What I did was wrong, but it came from somewhere real." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "This meeting isn't about what you felt," he said quietly. "It's a courtesy. You didn't earn it." The first domino fell that following Tuesday. Foster called Julian at 7:14 in the morning, before he'd finished his coffee. The court had accepted the prenuptial filing without challenge. The infidelity clause was clear, the documentation airtight. Simone's newly hired attorney, someone recommended by a friend she no longer had nothing to push back with. By Thursday, the terms were set. Simone received a settlement figure that was, by any honest measure, fair. It accounted for 11 years of marriage and would let her land on her feet if she was smart. What it did not give her was a mansion or a share of Meridian. It did not give her the cars registered in Julian's name, the investment accounts Foster had already quietly separated, or any claim to the contracts Julian was about to win back. Her attorney told her, apparently more than once, that fighting it would cost her more than she could ever gain. The prenup she dismissed as a formality the moment she signed had been drafted with precision she had never bothered to understand. She signed the settlement agreement on a Friday afternoon. Julian was told. He nodded once, and then he went back to work, exactly the way he always had. Terrence Boyd came to Julian's office the following Monday. He was a careful, quiet man in his mid-50s who'd held his minority stake for 6 years and, until Odessa's confession, had no idea he'd been the target of a slow, patient campaign. Simone had spent the better part of a year building that friendship. Dinners, phone calls, small favors offered without being asked. It looked like warmth. It had been an inventory the entire time. Foster walked Terrence through the evidence first. The timeline, a 22-second fragment the home security system had caught of Simone saying his name and the words, "If he leans hard enough." Then came the financial records showing that Colton's firm had been quietly positioned to absorb a piece of Meridian's portfolio if the leadership pressure had worked as planned. Terrence sat very still through all of it. When Foster finished, Terrence looked at Julian directly, his expression simple, the look of a man who understood he'd almost been used as a weapon and was quietly furious about it. "I want it documented that I had no knowledge of any of this," Terrence said. "Already done," Foster answered. Terrence extended his hand to Julian. "We're good," he said, "and we stay good." Julian shook it. Bianca handled Colton's side personally. She built 2 separate packages. The first one of Colton's 2 primary business partners, a detailed breakdown showing that over 14 months, cash funnel from Julian's household had quietly patched 3 of Colton's failing commercial projects, money he'd accepted, and used to build a public image of stability that was never real. The second package went to Colton's wife. Bianca drove it herself and handed it to a woman named Marisol at the front door of their Memorial area home. She didn't say much. The bank transfers and the timeline said everything that needed saying. By the end of that week, Colton's 2 business partners had called an emergency meeting. By the end of the following week, they'd begun dissolving the partnership entirely. His flagship project, already bleeding cash, lost its primary finance in the moment the fraud exposure reached the lending institution holding the construction loan. His marriage was over before the month ended. His reputation, carefully maintained across Houston's development circles for years, cracked publicly and fast. People in that industry talk. Julian made sure the right people knew exactly what Colton had done, not through gossip, but through documentation, the only currency Julian had ever trusted. The civil suit against Colton's company for the sabotage contracts landed the same week the settlement agreement did. Colton, hemorrhaging money on 3 fronts at once, couldn't afford to fight it. His legal team pushed hard for a quick resolution. Julian's team didn't blink. The settlement came in at a number that made Bianca smile when she read it out loud, which was not something she did often in that office. Simone came for the last of her things on a Saturday morning. 2 movers loading boxes while she stood near the door watching, moving through rooms slowly, touching nothing, like she was taking inventory of something already gone. Her face stayed composed the way a person's face gets when they've decided that falling apart in front of anyone is the one thing they refuse to do. Odessa moved quietly through her regular routine, not watching Simone, not acknowledging her at all. When the last box was loaded, Simone walked to her car, sat behind the wheel a moment, still and quiet, then drove through the gate one final time. It closed behind her, smooth and automatic, the way it always had. Except this time there was no code left on the other side that would ever bring it open for her again. For a while after that, Julian didn't feel much of anything. Not victory, not relief, just a kind of flat quiet that filled the house in the evenings. He kept working. He kept the schedule he'd always kept, up at 6, coffee, the walk around the property, the drive to Meridian's headquarters. He didn't chase the anger, and he didn't chase the satisfaction either. He let both of them pass through him and move on, the same way he'd learned to handle bad news on a job site years earlier. Acknowledge it, adjust, keep building. That discipline was the thing that had carried him this far. 6 months in, Meridian Development had grown, not louder or flashier, but stronger in a way that actually matters. Better contracts, deeper partnerships, a reputation that had survived a direct hit and come out cleaner on the other side. When the story of Colton Reyes' sabotage worked its way through Houston's development circles, the industry hadn't pulled away from Julian at all. It had moved closer. People respect a man who gets hit from 2 directions at once and answers with paperwork instead of drama. 3 new contracts landed in the first quarter alone, and Julian was careful with the growth, never chasing it. On Wednesday mornings, Julian started holding open office hours at Meridian for young entrepreneurs from Houston's 3rd Ward, the same streets he'd grown up on. They came in 2s and 3s with business plans folded and unfolded too many times. Or sometimes just a notebook and a single question. One young man, 23, from Julian's old block, came in with nothing but nerve and a half-formed idea about affordable housing. Julian spent 45 minutes with him. Not money, but something harder to find, a contact name, and a straight answer about what the idea still needed before it was ready. Julian had been that young man once, sitting across from someone who actually knew what they were doing and was willing to share it freely. Most people in that industry hold their knowledge close, like it might run out if they give too much of it away. Julian had learned a long time ago that it doesn't work that way at all. Across town, in a modest apartment in Bel Air that was perfectly fine and nothing more, Simone still used the Ashford name, though it no longer opened the doors it used to. She'd taken a coordinator position at a design firm. Entry-level work she was overqualified for on paper. She was good at the work. She'd always had the eye, but the industry moves on without you after 11 years away from it. Her apartment was tasteful, good light, simple furniture, a few pieces she'd managed to hold on to. If you didn't know what she'd come from, you wouldn't know anything was missing. But Houston knew. In the circles she used to move through effortlessly, the charity luncheons, the developer galas, the restaurants that didn't take reservations for just anyone, her name still came up occasionally, quietly, the way names come up when a story attached to them has become a cautionary tale. She stopped going to those events. The invitation slowed, then stopped entirely. She went to work. She came home. She built the life she had into something she could live inside of. Because what other option was left to her? Colton's company no longer existed. Vantage Capital had been formally dissolved months earlier. A civil judgment attached to the name, and a paper trail no legitimate lender in the state of Texas would ever look past. Colton himself had relocated to Dallas, according to people who still track that kind of thing. Whether he was rebuilding something there or simply running, Julian didn't know, and he didn't spend much time wondering. That was the thing that surprised Julian most. Looking back across that first year, he'd expected the anger to linger longer than it did. He'd expected some part of him to still need to check the scoreboard, to feel the satisfaction of knowing exactly where everyone had landed. But most mornings he simply woke up and thought about the work in front of him instead. The grief had been real, and he never pretended otherwise, not even to himself. There had been nights early on when the house felt too quiet, and 11 years sat heavy in every room like furniture nobody had moved. He had loved Simone once, genuinely and completely, and that was true regardless of everything that came after. What was also true was that the man who walked his property at dawn with a coffee mug and a clear conscience was still standing right there, exactly where he'd always been. He'd built the mansion, but he'd also rebuilt himself once before, back on a construction site off a Houston freeway with nothing but a work ethic and a decision nobody could see. He didn't need the second act to prove anything to Simone. He only needed it to prove something to the boy he used to be. A year to the day after that night in the kitchen, Julian stood at the same gate where it had all started, watching the sun clear the tree line the way he always had. Odessa was still with him, running the house the same steady way she always did. Terrence still held his stake, and the two of them had grown closer through everything, not more distant. Bianca had scaled back her private work to focus more time on Meridian's internal audits, trusting no one else with that level of access after everything she'd uncovered. Foster still handled every contract personally, still remembered the exact language of the prenup by heart. The gate had opened for Simone the day she walked into that house, believing nothing could ever touch her. It had closed on her the night she laughed and said she'd see whoever she wanted. It had opened again briefly, deliberately, while Julian let her get comfortable enough to be careless. And then it had closed one final time, the way gates do when there's genuinely nothing left on the other side worth returning for. Julian didn't think about the symbolism of it often. He just knew the gate worked exactly the way it was supposed to now, letting in the people who belonged and no one else. People in Houston still asked Julian sometimes, usually carefully, usually over dinner, whether he ever regrets how quiet he kept the whole thing, whether he wishes he'd said more to Simone in that kitchen the night she laughed at him. He always gives them the same answer. Loudness doesn't win anything. Documentation does. Anger fades in a week. Evidence, properly gathered and properly used, changes outcomes for years. He learned that on a construction site before he ever learned it in a courtroom, and nothing that happened with Simone or Colton or the company ever gave him a reason to believe otherwise. The truth Julian eventually settled into wasn't about winning. Not really. It was about the moment he realized that a woman who'd spent a year convincing herself he'd never actually leave had also spent that same year making it a great deal easier for him to go. Every betrayal carries its own instructions inside it, if you're patient enough to read them properly. Simone taught him more about who she really was in the 6 months after that laugh than she had in the 11 years before it. He simply chose to listen, and then he chose to act on what he heard. Karma, in Julian's experience, was rarely loud. It didn't come as a scene, a shouting match, or a dramatic confrontation staged for an audience. Most of the time, it looked like a locked gate on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. A woman standing outside her own former life, holding an overnight bag she never expected to need. It looked like a man who simply stopped protecting someone who'd stopped protecting him first. Real karma isn't watching somebody suffer for the sake of it. Sometimes it's just realizing that the person you assume would always take you back has quietly learned how to live without you entirely. So that's the story tonight. And if you're still with me, I want to say something real quick before we close out. Still just me, Uncle Sammy, talking directly to you. I built this channel because I believe there's an audience out there tired of stories where the good person just gets walked over and nothing ever changes. Every single Karma Diaries story is built the same way. Quiet people, patient people, people who let the receipts do the talking instead of their emotions. If that resonated with you tonight, tell me in the comments which part hit hardest, because I genuinely read all of them. And listen, if you made it this far into the story, do me one favor before you go. Hit that like button right now, because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories exactly like this one. Share it with somebody in your life who's been staying quiet for way too long about something they should have addressed months ago. And if you haven't already subscribed, do it now and turn on notifications, because I've got 2 more stories queued up this week that I think you're going to want to see the moment they drop. Julian Ashford didn't get a perfect ending. And honestly, none of us really do. What he got was something better than perfect. He got his peace back, his purpose back, and a clear sense of exactly who deserved a seat at his table going forward. The mansion still stands on Inwood Drive. The gate still opens every morning at 6 for the people who actually belong there. And somewhere across town, a woman who once laughed and said she'd see whoever she wanted finally understands what it costs when the person you underestimate is the one quietly writing the last chapter. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Remember to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the Karma Diaries by Uncle Sammy so you never miss a story again. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you'd have done differently in Julian's shoes. I promise I'll be reading through every single one of them. Until next time, stay patient, stay quiet when it counts, and always, always keep your receipts. This has been Uncle Sammy, and remember, the Karma Diaries never lies. The end.